In this reading from Beacon of Love, Stephanie Rollins has left her philandering husband and returned to her hometown of Eugene, Oregon. She drops by to see Francine, the mother of Stephanie's first love, Paula. Steph wasn't prepared for the woman who greeted her at the door. Francine was emaciated and her cheeks were hollow. Her skin had yellowed, and the steel gray hair Steph remembered from when she was in high school had been replaced by white tufts of cotton that sat on her head. She realized Francine was in her 80s. She'd been so much older than the other parents, having given birth to Paula at 43. She hugged her, and Steph returned the embrace gently. It was like squeezing a hummingbird, and she worried she would break her. "Come in," she said. She followed Francine to the sofa, replaying the last time she'd visited, the night she came to ask Francine's advice about her pregnancy. Francine had listened carefully and told Steph to keep the baby and marry Lawrence, holding her hand and assuring her that she was making the right decision. She'd gone with Steph to tell her parents, a gesture Steph would never forget. The place was exactly as she remembered it, including the plastic that covered the sofa and love seat. Francine was of a different generation than her parents, one that practiced frugality as a science. The faint smell of menthol hung in the air like a hospital. Steph gazed at the photos that covered every flat surface in the living room. Most of them were of Paula, Francine, and Paula's only child, but a few 8x10s featured Paul in his dress blues, holding a young Paula in his arms and standing beside a small plane. He'd been a pilot, first in the Navy and then for a commercial airline. He'd been killed by a drunk driver when Paula was 10. Her eyes settled on Paula's senior picture, and a kaleidoscope of images filled her brain, her laugh, her voice, and their first kiss. She'd imagined Paula's face nearly every day of her adult life, but she rarely took the time to pull her box of memories off the top shelf of the closet in Scottsdale and retrieve any of the old photos. The price for her laziness was a hazy remembrance of Paula's true self, the richness of her blue eyes, her aquiline nose, and the dimple in her chin. She'd forgotten about that entirely. Francine slowly settled next to her, every movement conveying her frailty. Her demeanor was still that of a lady. She wore a simple skirt and blouse, for it would be inappropriate to receive guests in a housecoat or jeans. Steph instantly thought of her mother, who would open her front door dressed in her underwear. "Would you care for something to drink?" Francine asked. "I've made iced tea." She slowly started to rise, but Steph jumped up. "Oh, let me get it." She retrieved the serving tray from the kitchen, cringing at the effort Francine must have exerted to prepare the refreshments. Steph joined her again on the sofa, and they sipped the tea. "How long are you staying in Eugene?" Francine asked. Steph shrugged. "I don't know. Indefinitely, I guess." The wheels in her mind were turning, but she said nothing. Steph could feel the difference in their ages, sitting in that room. She took a sip of tea and asked, "Steph, you haven't spoken to Paula recently, have you?" The question was asked innocently, but Steph sensed it was rhetorical. She stumbled for words, unable to explain why her childhood friend of 10 years had been absent for her entire adult life. She simply said, "No." "I never knew what happened between the two of you. Would you care to tell me now?" She spoke to the coffee table in front of them, an extraordinarily odd gesture for her. As children, she'd always reminded them to look at adults when they were engaged in conversation. To do otherwise was rude. Steph's mouth started moving, but words wouldn't come out. After 3 false starts, she cleared her throat and planned a response. "Francine, what happened between me and Paula was unfortunate. I blame myself for losing touch with her. She was a dear friend and we had a ridiculous argument, but it's all water under the bridge." Steph cringed at her use of a hackneyed cliché, but she couldn't tell Francine the truth. She met her gaze with a hard stare. When Francine looked away, Steph noticed her hands shook and her shoulders sagged. "You look tired, and I should probably be going. Next time I'll visit in the morning," she said. thinking perhaps Francine would be better rested after a night's sleep. Francine offered no protest about her departure and followed her to the door. They hugged again, and Steph could hear her heavy breathing. She wondered if she was sick, and if so, how bad was it? When they parted, Francine dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "You're like my other daughter, you know that, don't you?" The comment implied a connection between her and Paula, one that hadn't existed for 17 years. Francine took a breath and set her jaw before she spoke. "Steph, I want you to do something for me." "Of course." Francine put her hands on Steph's shoulders and looked her squarely in the eye. "I know you haven't seen Paula for a long time. Someday, I want you to make up with her. I want you to promise me that by the time you're as old as I am, the two of you will be friends again. You can do that, can't you?" In her eyes, Steph could see how much she'd hurt Paula. Does she know we kissed? Does she know we almost went to bed together? When Steph said nothing, Francine asked again, "Can you promise me, Stephanie? Will you do this for me? Someday?" "Yes, of course, someday." She hugged her once more and left, not knowing that it would be the last time she'd ever see her, and that someday was just around the corner.